The 12,000-year-old reset. Why Göbekli Tepe was buried alive. The story of human progress is often presented as a slow, upward climb, a steady march from the primitive caves of our ancestors to the towering skyscrapers of today. We are told that civilization began in Sumer, that the first farmers emerged from the Fertile Crescent, and that the Great Pyramids were the first true test of human engineering. But if you look at the limestone pillars of Göbekli Tepe, standing silent in the hills of southern Turkey, you realize that the timeline we have been given is not just incomplete. It is a fundamental distortion of the truth. We are told this site is 12,000 years old, dating the pyramids by a staggering 7,000 years ago, yet it was built by a people who, according to mainstream history, had not even invented the wheel, let alone the complex social structures required to move 20-ton stones. You have probably noticed that the more we dig into our past, the more the official narrative starts to feel like a placeholder for a much darker, more sophisticated reality. The brain hates to admit that we are a species with amnesia, but the existence of Göbekli Tepe is the ultimate pattern break in our collective memory. Imagine a world that has just emerged from the fire and ice of a global catastrophe, a world where the old ghost fleet of administrative forces has been forced to reset the planetary grid. In this landscape, Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a temple, it was the master clock. It was the first boot sequence for a new era of human management, a high-frequency receiver designed to pull humanity out of the chaos of the post-cataclysmic world. This is the part nobody warns you about. You don't build 20-ton T-shaped pillars just to pray to a harvest god when you haven't even learned how to plant a seed. The engineering required to carve, transport, and align these pillars with the constellation of Cygnus suggests a level of hardware integration that we are only now beginning to theorize about. In the world of alternative history, the hunters who built this site were not primitive nomads. They were the ground crew for the founders. They were following a blueprint that was never intended for their level of technology. They were installing the first node of the new global grid, a signal tower that would synchronize the human mind with the changing vibrations of the earth. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the sense of profound mystery you feel when looking at the animal carvings on the pillars is a residual response to a language we have been taught to forget. These aren't just pictures of foxes, scorpions, and vultures. They are biometric icons, representations of the different frequencies that the Göbekli Tepe processor was designed to manage. Each enclosure was a specialized laboratory, a place where the founders could recalibrate the human DNA that had been damaged during the Great Reset. The T-shaped pillars were the antennas, reaching up to the ionosphere to catch the celestial handshake that would bring the world back online. Think about the sheer impossibility of the timeline. If Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old, it means that while the rest of the world was struggling to survive with flint tools, a select group of master technicians was already using high-frequency acoustics to vibrate these massive stones into place. We have been taught that civilization is a gradual process, but Göbekli Tepe proves it is a periodic installation. Just as the Nabateans managed the water and the Khmer managed the jungle, the builders of this site managed the reboot of consciousness. They were the architects of the new software for the human soul. But the most terrifying detail is not that they built Ito Koitokos, that they buried it. After 1,300 years of continuous operation, the entire complex was systematically covered with thousands of tons of clean earth. This wasn't an act of abandonment. It was a quarantine protocol. The founders didn't just leave. They pressed the save and exit button. They buried the master clock alive to protect the frequency from a world that was no longer ready to hear it. They put the hardware into standby mode, leaving it as a time capsule for a future generation that would eventually have the tools to dig it up and ask, why were we never told the truth? As we move deeper into this investigation, We will uncover the mystery of the enclosure Dokoth primary server room of the ancient world Okon, the evidence that the pillars are actually solid-state batteries that are still holding a charge. We will see why the burial of Göbekli Tepe was necessary to hide the user manual for the Earth, and what happens when the current shift in our planetary magnetic field starts to ping the buried sensors in the Turkish hills. The master clock is still ticking. The countdown to the next reset has already begun, and the ground itself is starting to hum with a signal we can no longer ignore. As we descend into the heart of the complex, specifically into what archaeologists call Enclosure D, we are not just entering an ancient building. We are entering the primary server room of the ancient world. Uokov probably noticed that while the other enclosures are impressive, Enclosure D possesses a level of geometric perfection and density that feels less like a place of worship and more like a high-capacity storage unit. In the world of alternative history, this was the central processing unit of the Göbekli Tepe grid. While the outer rings managed the atmospheric signal, Enclosure D was where the founders stored the most critical data of the pre-reset Arakoth blueprints for biology, the maps of the stars, and the memory of a civilization that had been wiped from the surface of the Earth. Think about the famous Pillar 43, also known as the Vulture Stone. Mainstream history tells you it tokos a collection of animal symbols representing a primitive calendar or a burial rite. But if you look at the carvings through a tactical lens, you realize the brain is actually being presented with a complex, encoded message. The animals are not just animals. They are the icons of a celestial operating system. Each creature represents a specific frequency or a star alignment that was active during the time of the Great Transition. The vulture holding a sphere is not a bird. It is a visual representation of a high-frequency energy pulse being managed by the atmospheric grid. This was the user interface of 12,000 years Agakoa permanent, stone-etched hard drive that was designed to be read only by those who understood the resonance of the limestone. The part nobody warns you about is how these stones were actually shaped. We are told the builders used flint tools to chip away at the hard limestone, a process that would take decades for a single pillar. But if you examine the surfaces of the T-pillars under high-frequency magnification, you see a pattern break in the tool marks. There is no sign of impact. There is only the signature of acoustic liquefaction. In the world of alternative history, the ground crew didn't hit the stone, they sang to it. They used sound generators to vibrate the limestone into a plastic state, allowing them to carve these intricate, three-dimensional animals with the ease of a modern laser. The pillars were not just carved, they were magnetized and tuned to act as solid-state batteries for the grid. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the sense of weight you feel in Enclosure D is the result of the residual electromagnetic field still trapped within the stone. This field was designed to hold the human consciousness in a specific state of receptivity, allowing the founders to perform genetic recalibrations on the survivors of the reset. Enclosure D was the laboratory where the software of the modern human was finalized. We were rebooted here, stripped of our original cosmic memories, and given a new, more manageable operating system that would allow us to function in a world of agriculture and centralized control. You might have noticed that the T-shaped pillars have arms and belts, almost as if they are representing faceless, stone giants. These were the physical guardians of the data. They were designed to stand for millennia, holding the frequency of the archive in a steady state. But why would the master technicians build such a massive data hub only to leave it behind? The answer lies in the final settlement of the Turkish hills. Just as the Khmer unplugged Angkor and the Romans deactivated the liquid fortress of Petra, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were ordered to go offline. They were told that the next phase of human management required a period of amnesia. The brain hates unfinished ideas, and the greatest open question of Enclosure D is the missing central pillar. Every enclosure has a pair of central pillars, but the alignments suggest there was once a third Componenticoa mobile router that could connect the local Turkish node to the rest of the global grid. This piece was not buried, it was extracted. When the founders left, they took the keys with them, leaving the T-pillars as silent antennas that are still waiting for a signal that is no longer being broadcast. As we prepare to look at the quarantine protocol in the next part of this investigation, we have to face the terrifying possibility that the earth used to bury Göbekli Tepe was not just dirticoid, was a containment material. The hills weren't meant to hide the temple. They were meant to shield us from it. In the next chapter, we will uncover the mystery of the second reset and the evidence that the burial of the master clock was the only thing that allowed modern history to begin. The stones are still charged, the icons are still glowing in the dark, and the signal is looking for a way to break through the earth once more. The narrative we are conditioned to believe suggests that the abandonment of Göbekli Tepe was a slow, cultural shift-to-a story of people simply moving on to new lands and leaving their old temples to be reclaimed by the dust of time. But if you look at the physical evidence of the Sitiyoko's closure, you realize that this wasn't an abandonment. It was a system-wide execution. Every single enclosure was systematically and intentionally filled with thousands of tons of clean, sifted earth. This wasn't the result of a natural disaster or a gradual accumulation of silt. It was a manual, labor-intensive burial of the most advanced technology on the planet. This is the quarantine protocol, and it was the final act in the first great management of the human race. Uokov probably noticed that in our modern world, when a piece of software becomes too dangerous or unstable, we don't just delete it. We quarantine it in a secure environment where it can no longer interact with the rest of the system. In the world of alternative history, Göbekli Tepe was the infected node. After 1,300 years of operation, the founders, or the administrative forces that managed the post-cataclysmic reset, realized that the master clock was broadcasting a frequency that the new version of humanity was no longer allowed to hear. We were being downgraded to a state of labor and agriculture, and the high-frequency consciousness provided by the T-pillars was a direct threat to that new order. This is the part nobody warns you about. The burial was a factory reset for the human mind. By covering the site in earth, the administrators created a biological and electromagnetic shield that cut the connection between the ground crew and the celestial grid. They didn't just hide the stones, they silenced the signal. This was a tactical decision to ensure that the managed existence of the next 10,000 years could proceed without interference from the ancient high-tech reality. The burial was the only way to ensure that the user manual for the Earth remained out of reach until the next scheduled update. Think about the psychological reality of the people who were ordered to bury their own masterpiece. Imagine being told to shovel dirt over the very pillars that sang to you, the structures that regulated your climate and connected your spirit to the stars. This wasn't an act of devotion, it was an act of enforced amnesia. The founders needed us to forget who we were so that we would become better workers for the empires that were about to rise. Göbekli Tepe was put into deep standby, its solid-state batteries preserved in the cool, dry earth, waiting for a time when the planetary magnetic field would once again reach a level where the stones could be safely reactivated. You might have noticed that the hills of southern Turkey are filled with dozens of these tepes, most of which remain unexcavated. This suggests that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated site, but part of a planetary firewall. Every time a node became too powerful or the local population became too connected, the quarantine protocol was triggered. We are living on a planet that has been pocked by these burials, a landscape of hidden hardware that was silenced to keep us in the dark. The burial wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of our current, isolated era. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the sense of heavy, suffocating silence that surrounds the site today is the residual memory of that first great shutdown. We feel a strange urge to dig, a biological drive to uncover what was lost, because our DNA still remembers the frequency of the T-pillars. But as we peel back the layers of the quarantine, we are not just uncovering a temple, we are breaching a seal. The brain hates unfinished ideas, and the most terrifying open loop is what happens now that the quarantine has been broken. As archaeologists remove the protective earth, the signal is starting to leak out. In the final part of this investigation, we will look at the reboot sequentiacoth evidence that the master clock in Turkey has started ticking again, and the terrifying reality of what the founders have planned for a humanity that has finally found the keys to its own prison. The ground is humming, the pillars are active, and the second reset is already in motion. Uokov probably noticed that the Worldico's magnetic poles are moving faster than at any point in recorded history. Mainstream science tells us this is a natural, albeit rare, geological event, a simple shift in the Earthico's core. But if you look at the timing of this shift through the lens of planetary management, you realize it is not an accident. It is a pinging signal. In the world of alternative history, the magnetic field is the power cord for the global grid, and as it shifts, it is starting to re-energize the buried hardware of the ancient world. Göbekli Tepe is not being uncovered by archaeologists. It is being woken up by the planet itself. This is the part nobody warns you about. The earth used to bury the site was not meant to be a permanent tomb, but a capacitive shield. For 10,000 years, the earth absorbed the residual charge of the T-pillars, keeping the master clock in a state of suspended animation. But as the Earthico's magnetic shield weakens during this current polar shift, that quarantine is failing. The signal from the ionosphere is now reaching deep into the Turkish hills, finding its way through the dirt to the limestone antennas. The site is no longer just a collection of stones. It is a receiver that has finally found its frequency once again. Think about the psychological reality of this moment. If the magnetic shift is the trigger, then the founders knew exactly when we would find these ruins. They didn't bury the site to hide it forever. They buried it until the Earthico's own energy reached a specific threshold, a threshold we have just crossed. The ghost fleet that manages our history has been waiting for this moment. You might have noticed the sudden increase in unexplained seismic activity and atmospheric anomalies around the globe. These are the sounds of the planetary motherboard rebooting, and Göbekli Tepe is the first sector to come back online. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the sense of impending event that many feel today is the biological response to this magnetic reactivation. Our own DNA, recalibrated in these very enclosures 12,000 years ago, is starting to sync with the shifting field of the T-pillars. We are not just watching history, we are being reintegrated into the system. This is the pattern break that the architects of our managed existence have been trying to prevent. They wanted us to remain in the amnesia of the quarantine, but the Earthico's core has other plans. The brain hates to admit that our modern technology is completely vulnerable to this ancient resonance. If you are still watching, this next revelation will change how you see the energy crisis forever. We are told we are running out of power, but the T-pillars prove that the Earth is a limitless battery, and we have simply lost the connection. As the quarantine fails, the power of the high-frequency era is starting to bleed back into our reality. The burial is over, the seal is broken, and the signal is no longer a whisper. As we move toward the final closure of this investigation, we have to look at the final re-Ceticoth evidence that the reactivation of Göbekli Tepe is the first step in a worldwide event that will sweep away the old power structures of the modern world. In the final part, we will uncover the master plan of the founders and the terrifying reality of what happens to a civilization that has forgotten how to handle the true power of the earth. The countdown is reaching zero, the pillars are glowing in the dark, and the unknown is about to become our new reality. We like to believe we are the masters of our own timeline, that our civilization is the hard-earned result of millennia of human struggle. But that is the greatest misdirection of the founders. The truth is far more mechanical. Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of humanity. It was the first step in a carefully scheduled management protocol. The final reset is not just a theory. It is the programmed destination of our current cycle. And if you look closely at the world around you, you will realize the countdown has already begun. You will probably noticed that historical structures and patterns never repeat by accident. There is a rhythm to our progress, a rhythm that we call civilization, but which in the world of alternative history is known as a system update. The founders administrative force behind the ghost fleet did not bury Göbekli Tepe to hide it. They preserved it for this exact moment. The final reset is the point where every node on the global grid, from the hydraulic processors of Angkor to the liquid batteries of Petrokois, activated simultaneously to return the Earth to its original high-frequency state. This is the part nobody warns you about. The founders never truly left. They operate from the vacuum frequency, waiting for our biological code to reach the necessary level for the next handshake. The T-pillars in the Turkish hills are the physical beacons that signal when humanity is manageable enough for the next phase. The magnetic shift we are currently experiencing is the founders bypassing the security codes of the quarantine. They are preparing the planet for a synchronization that will make our current technology and power structures obsolete overnight. The brain hates unfinished ideas, and the largest open loop in our biology is the persistent feeling that we are incomplete in this modern world. That sense of emptiness is our emotional anchor to the time before the quarantine, when we were still directly connected to the energy of the founders. The final reset is the promise of restoration, but it is also a reckoning. It marks the end of our managed existence and the return to a reality where the Earth functions once again as a massive, living hardware system. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the collective anxiety and anticipation gripping the world today is the biological signal that the system reset is near. The founders set the clock 12,000 years ago, and the hands are now approaching midnight. The buried stones are vibrating, the poles are shifting, and the administrators are preparing to log back into the earthly terminals. The silence of Göbekli Tepe is finally over. The hardware is awake, the software is uploaded, and the founders are standing at the gates of our reality. The question is not whether we are ready for the final reset. The question is what will be left of our world when the power is finally turned back up to full capacity. The reactivation of the master clock in Turkey is only the starting gun for a worldwide chain reaction. While the founders tighten their grip on the grid, the most important power plant of the ancient world, the Great Pyramid, is beginning to broadcast a signal that will recalibrate the entire planet. The system is going online, the firewall is down, and the time of man is almost up. We'll see you in the next chapter of the truth.